Picture two travelers slipping through a city gate at dusk. Their robes are gray with the dust of a journey longer than any map could hold, and one of them carries a plain walking cane, held just a little too carefully. Because inside that hollow length of wood is a secret worth an empire. The stolen source of silk itself, smuggled all the way out of the East. And they have not brought it to just any city. They have brought it to the one place in the world that could keep it. Behind those gates rise the greatest walls ever built, and above them a dome that seems to float on light. Rome, the Rome you think you know, has already fallen. Its western emperors are gone, its city sacked, its glory a memory. But this is the other Rome, the eastern half, and it will not fall for another 1,000 years. We remember it today by a name its own people never once spoke. We call it Byzantium, and its story is not a story of luck. It is the story of an empire that turned survival itself into a science and built a machine to cheat death over and over for 1,000 years. So let us begin by clearing away the biggest myth of all, its very name. We call them the Byzantines. They would have been baffled by the word. The name Byzantine was invented more than 1,000 years after our story begins, coined by a German scholar named Hieronymus Wolff in the year 1557, long after the empire itself was dust. The people who actually lived it never heard it. They called themselves something simpler and far prouder. They called themselves Romans. And here is the thing. They were not wrong. This was no new kingdom. It was the unbroken eastern half of the Roman Empire, still standing, still calling itself Roman, long after the West had crumbled. In the year 330, the Emperor Constantine had moved the capital east to a fortress city on the water, and there the Roman state simply carried on. Then, in 476, the western half fell, its last emperor deposed, its lands carved up by foreign kings. The whole world assumed that Rome was finished. It wasn't. The eastern half lived on for nearly 1,000 years more, all the way to 1453, which leaves us with a single stubborn question, the one that runs beneath everything that follows. How? Survival begins with a single brilliant choice: where to stand. Constantine did not pick his new capital by accident. He built it on the site of an old Greek town called Byzantium, and the ground itself was a masterpiece of defense. Picture a triangle of land, a peninsula reaching out into the water, with the sea guarding 3 of its sides. It sat astride a narrow strait called the Bosphorus, the only gateway between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, the very hinge between Europe and Asia. Every ship, every cargo, every fortune moving between those two worlds had to pass beneath its walls. An enemy could not easily surround it because the sea guarded most of it. An enemy could not easily starve it because fresh supplies could always arrive by ship. And it sat squarely in the middle of the richest trade routes on Earth, growing wealthy simply by existing. This was the first tool, and perhaps the deepest one. Before a single soldier drew a sword, before a single wall was raised, the empire had already won half of every war it would ever fight. because it had chosen the finest defensive ground in the known world. Choose the right place to stand, and you have already begun to survive. But a peninsula still has one open side, the land. And so the empire gave that side the greatest fortification of the entire age. Under a boy emperor named Theodosius in the early 400s, workers raised what we now call the Theodosian Walls. And this was not one wall, it was three, laid one behind the other like the layers of a trap. First, a wide moat, then an outer wall, then, rising behind it, a towering inner wall, studded with dozens upon dozens of great stone towers. An attacker who fought his way across the moat found himself pinned beneath the outer wall. An attacker who somehow cleared the outer wall found himself trapped in a killing ground below the inner wall, with nowhere to go but back. And so, for roughly 800 years, no army on earth broke through those land walls by force. Empires threw themselves against them and simply shattered. The city behind them earned a reputation that was almost magical. The city that could not be taken. And here is the truth most people miss. A city you cannot starve because it drinks from the sea, and cannot storm because of a wall like that, is a city that can simply outlast its enemies. Given walls like these, time itself becomes a weapon. Still, the enemies kept coming. In the 7th and 8th centuries, a new power rose in the east, the great Arab Caliphate, and twice it hurled everything it had against the city, once in the 670s and again around the year 718. Fleets filled the water. The empire's survival hung by a single thread. And then it unveiled a weapon that has haunted the imagination ever since. They called it Greek fire. It was a liquid flame pumped through bronze tubes from the prows of warships, and its terrible gift was this: it burned upon water. It clung to hulls and sails and everything it touched, and the sea itself could not put it out. Enemy fleets were turned to ash upon the waves. Tradition credits its invention to a man named Kallinikos around the year 672, though even that is uncertain. But what is certain is the secret behind it. The recipe was guarded as a matter of life and death, passed down from one emperor to the next, and never once written down. Scholars still argue over what it was truly made of, and the honest answer is that no one really knows. The formula was lost to history. Because a weapon no rival can copy is a weapon no rival can ever plan around. Not every war is won with fire. Some are won without a battle at all, and this was the empire's quietest genius. Its fourth tool was money. Back in the early 300s, Constantine had minted a small gold coin called the solidus, about 4.5 grams of nearly pure gold. And for the next 700 years, that coin held its weight and its purity almost without wavering. An astonishing record no currency had ever matched before. Merchants trusted it from the shores of Britain to the markets of distant China. One historian nicknamed it the dollar of the Middle Ages, and the name fits. A coin the whole world trusted was a kind of power all its own. And with that gold came the second half of the tool, guile. Rather than bleed its armies in endless war, the empire learned instead to pay. It paid dangerous neighbors to simply turn around and go home. And cleverer still, it paid one enemy to go and attack another, letting its rivals exhaust themselves while it watched calmly from behind its walls. This was not weakness, it was strategy, refined into an art, even written down in manuals of statecraft for future emperors to study. Why spend a life, the thinking went, when you could spend a coin? Why fight a war that you can simply buy? Walls and fire and gold could defend the empire, but something else had to hold it together across the centuries, through good emperors and bad, through triumphs and disasters alike. That something was the machine of the state itself. In the 6th century, the Emperor Justinian gathered 1,000 years of Roman law, scattered, tangled, and endlessly contradictory, and had it sorted and codified into a single great body of civil law. That code would outlive the empire itself, becoming a root of the legal tradition across much of the world. Justinian also raised a church so vast that its golden dome seemed to hang from heaven, Hagia Sophia, the beating heart of an Orthodox Christian faith that bound emperor, church, and people into one single body, one identity. And above it all sat the deepest symbol of them all, the purple. Now remember those two monks and their hollow cane. According to the chronicler Procopius, silkworm eggs were smuggled into the city around the year 552, and from that stolen secret, the empire grew a silk industry all its own, and the finest, deep purple silk was reserved for the emperor alone. In the palace stood a chamber lined with rare purple stone, and a true-born heir was delivered there, and forever after called born in the purple. Legitimacy you could see, authority woven into cloth and carved into stone, and legitimacy that survives the death of any single emperor is legitimacy that lets an empire endure. The real proof of this toolkit was never that the empire never bled. It was how many times it should have died, and simply didn't. When it lost its richest lands, Egypt and Syria, to the Arab armies, it did not collapse. It reinvented itself. Over the 7th century, the empire rebuilt its army from the ground up, settling its soldiers on grants of land, so that instead of drawing a wage, a man now defended the very fields that fed his own family. Tradition credits this to an emperor named Heraclius, though historians now think it grew slowly, over generations, rather than from any single reform. But either way, it worked. A cheaper, tougher army, rooted in the soil it protected. And yet, honesty demands the other half of the story, because even this machine could overreach. Under Justinian, the empire's greatest general reconquered North Africa and Italy, briefly rebuilding the old Roman world in the 6th century. It was a triumph, and most historians now argue, a trap. The empire had stretched itself dangerously thin, and when a terrible plague struck, beginning around 541, that overstretched giant paid a fearful price for its ambition. Survival, it turned out, was never about being invincible. It was about adapting, again and again, whatever the century demanded of it. So, how does a 1,000-year empire finally die? Slowly, and then all at once. The first mortal wound came not from a foreign enemy, but from fellow Christians. In 1204, an army of crusaders, meant for a holy war far away, turned instead upon the great city and sacked it, pouring over the weaker sea walls while the mighty land walls still stood untouched. The empire was gutted. It clawed its capital back in 1261, but it was never whole again, only a shadow of the power it had once been. And then came the final morning. On the 29th of May, 1453, after a siege of some 53 days, a young sultan named Mehmed dragged up something no wall in all of history had ever been built to face: an enormous cannon cast to shatter stone. And it did what 1,000 years of armies could not. It broke the Theodosian Walls. The last emperor, another Constantine, is said to have thrown off his imperial purple and vanished into the fighting, dying as an ordinary soldier in the breach. The purple went out. And here, at last, is the payoff. The walls, the fire, the gold, the guile, the law, the faith, the purple. None of it was ever luck. It was a machine engineered to survive, and it ran for 1,000 years until a single new invention made its oldest tool obsolete in a single afternoon. But that last siege, the monster cannon, the 53 desperate days, the final emperor who chose to die a Roman rather than flee, that deserves a telling all its own. And that is exactly where we go next. If you want to understand how the world truly worked, and how in so many ways it still does, then stay with us and subscribe. The Codex closes until the next story is written.